Or you can sit in your own seat. I know we are creatures of habit. Sometimes we want to sit in our assigned seat, but technically there are no assigned seats. You can sit anywhere you want to, but you can sit in any seat you wish. Come on in and make yourself comfortable. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You can be seated in the seat. Just make yourself comfortable. All right, lawyers and parties, you may be seated. Let's go ahead and swear in Dr. Greenberg because we did have a lunch break.
Benita Renee Greenberg, B-O-N-I-T-A R-E-N-E-E G-R-E-E-N-B-E-R-G.
You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Greenberg, when we left off, you were describing going home to Rusty and Andrea's house after leaving the daycare. While you were at the house, first let me ask you, how far is it from the Dunwoody daycare to where Andrea and Rusty were living at the time?
Less than 5 minutes.
Do you recall the address of the home?
No, sorry.
That's all right. Was Manjette Court sound
Yes, of
familiar?
course.
Okay. During the car ride from the daycare to the house, what were you doing?
I was frantic in that we didn't know where our son-in-law was.
What was Andrea doing? Do you recall?
She was sobbing. She wasn't sobbing. She was in my arms. I just couldn't console her.
Do you recall her being on her phone?
While we were
When
going
you were in
from...
the car from the daycare to the house, do you
No.
recall Andrea being on her cell phone?
No.
Do you recall her having her cell phone with her?
Yes.
How long did you stay at the house once you arrived?
As long as it took to locate where Rusty had been taken.
All right, and can you tell the jurors how was it that you located where Rusty had been taken?
My husband called all of the emergency rooms in Atlanta.
At the time that your husband was making those phone calls, did any member of the family, as far as your knowledge, know where Rusty had been taken?
No.
Had any member of the family, to your knowledge, known that Rusty had been shot?
Because we thought the worst, because at one point we were told to go home and stay there, and someone would come and talk to us, we thought the worst.
Did you get any information, or was any information relayed to you based on your husband's phone conversation with the hospital where Rusty had been taken?
Only that at one point he located the hospital where Rusty was.
Which hospital was it that Rusty had been taken to?
Atlanta Medical Center.
Did Atlanta Medical Center give you any information about Rusty's condition over the phone that you're aware of?
I didn't speak to them.
Was any information relayed to you about Rusty's condition after the phone call to the Atlanta Medical Center?
No.
All right. So what did you do after you received this information?
We got into the car and exited Manjette Court onto Chambly Dunwoody Street.
Let me stop you right there. You said we got into the car. Who was it that got into the car?
My husband, our son, Andrea, and myself.
Okay, all four of you were traveling together?
That's correct.
Who was driving?
My husband,
Who was sitting in the passenger seat in the front?
our son,
You and Andrea were where?
in the back.
Okay. Before you got into the car and when you were on your way to the hospital, do you recall seeing Andrea with her cell phone?
I believe she had her cell phone with her.
Do you remember her being on her phone, either using it to make calls or texts or for any reason? Do you remember Andrea being on her phone or using her phone while you were at the house?
No,
Do you remember Andrea trying to get a hold of Henry Newman?
while we were in the car.
At any time prior to the time that you left Andrea's house?
No,
Did you call the Sneiderman family while you were at the house?
my husband did.
Your husband called who? Do you remember who he spoke to?
Don Sneiderman.
Did you speak to any member of the Sneiderman family?
No,
Were you aware at the time that your husband was calling Don Sneiderman, or were you made aware of that fact later?
I was in the room when he spoke to him.
Once you left the house, you were describing being in the car. While you're in the car on the way to the hospital, how long did it take you to drive there?
$15 minutes, 20 minutes.
What were you doing for the 15 minutes you were in the car?
I was holding on to Andrea.
What was Andrea doing for the 15 minutes you were in the car?
She made some calls. I don't only remember one of them. She called a coworker specifically to ask that he secure her office door.
To secure her office door?
Correct.
Was there any discussion about why she felt she needed her office door secured?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay. Do you remember Andrea trying to call Hemi Newman?
Yes,
Did she tell you why she was trying to call Hemi Newman?
well, she had just left work. He was her boss. She wanted to let him know that something had happened to her husband.
Is that what she told you, or is that what you're guessing her purpose was? Do you recall?
That's what she told me.
That's what she told you? Okay. Do you remember how many times she tried to call him?
2 times, 3 times.
When you arrived at the hospital, did someone finally tell you what had happened to Rusty?
Eventually,
Who was it? Who was the first person to tell you that Rusty had been shot?
Dr. Waterman.
Did you know his name was Dr. Waterman at the time?
I don't remember.
Okay. But either you knew then or you have since learned.
Correct.
Okay. And what did Dr. Waterman, let me ask you first, where were you when you learned this information?
We were in a room that I knew was a bad room.
It was outside the larger waiting area?
It was isolated.
Who was with you?
My husband, Andrea, our son.
Was there anyone else there with you that you can recall?
I don't recall. There were other people that came into the room eventually, but we were there by ourselves for a period of time.
Do you need a moment?
No,
Can you approximate for me what time this was? Do you have any idea?
I don't remember what time it was.
When Dr. Waterman told you that Rusty had been shot, did he give you any other information about Rusty's condition?
That he was dead.
He told you he was dead? I want to move on and direct your attention now, Mrs. Greenberg, to the following day, November 19th, 2010. You've testified already that on November 19th, 2010, you were present for an interview that Andrea gave to the police department, the Dunwoody Police Department.
Yes,
And you've described for me who was there.
I did.
And you let me know that you were there for the entirety, you were with Andrea for the entirety of that interview? Is
Yes,
that your recollection? Okay. Your Honor, State's Exhibit number 61 has already been admitted into evidence without objection and published for the jury. I'd like to republish part of it with this witness and ask her some questions.
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please play clip 13-3, please.
Has there been anybody recently, when I say recently, recently, when I say recently, that has expressed an interest in you and in trying to break up the family?
Yes.
Who?
My boss.
Your boss?
Yes.
Okay. What's his name?
Honey. Why do you have to tell me?
Mrs. Greenberg? On that tape, who is it that's saying, "Mom, I have to tell them"? Can you identify that voice?
if it was Mom, I have to tell them, then it has to be my daughter.
Did you do anything or say anything to Andrea to prompt her to say, "Mom, I have to tell them"?
I don't recall.
Did you make any sort of gesture to Andrea to indicate or to prompt her response, "Mom, I have to tell them"?
No,
Do you know why Andrea said, "Mom, I have to tell them"?
no.
Before this interview on November 19th, 2010, had you and Andrea had a discussion about Hemi Newman?
Yes,
Did you and Andrea discuss what you would tell the police about Hemi Newman?
no.
Between November 18th, the day Rusty was shot, and November 19th, the time that you gave this interview, had you and Andrea discussed what Andrea would tell the police about her relationship with Hemi Newman?
No,
So as we sit here now, you don't have any information or any idea of why Andrea would say, "Mom, I have to tell them"?
no.
Okay. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to play another clip from the same interview.
You may.
Thank you. Okay. Clip 13-5, please.
This is 13-5.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just explain to you that Andrea came on board in her job as one of the only females amongst a group of...
No, that's not necessarily true.
And she has conducted herself above board. She's extremely professional. This is Rusty's brother.
Yeah, we have to.
That's fine.
I just need for you to know that as soon as that happened, she shared that with me. She said, I made it very clear to him that I wasn't interested in him, that this wasn't going to go anywhere. And
You knew about all this.
I knew this. So she talks with me.
Yeah.
We're close. And she said, I can handle it. I said, what are you going to do? Should you go to someone with HR? Who do you talk to about sexual harassment? And she said, no, I can deal with it. I'm making it clear to you that this will never, it's never going to happen.
How long ago? You know this?
No, I do not.
Not now.
Not
now.
We don't need to talk about it as a family now, okay?
But
Mrs. Greenberg, the last voice we heard, the person who said, we don't need to talk about this as a family right now, whose voice is that?
My husband's.
He was speaking to someone else. Who was he speaking to? Another male voice. Whose voice was that?
Our son.
Did you agree with your husband that that wasn't the place to have the family discussion about Andrea's relationship with Hemi Newman?
I don't understand the question.
Your voice was heard on that clip, is that right?
Yes.
You were the first person who was speaking.
Yes.
And can you explain to me why you interjected into the interview in that way?
No, I can't.
Did you think Andrea hadn't made it clear how she had rebuffed Mr. Newman's advances?
Clear to whom?
To the police. You were speaking to the police, weren't you?
I think she had made it clear.
Then why was it you interjected with the information that you did?
And I'm going to object to this question.
What's the objection?
What her state of mind, what Mrs. Greenberg's state of mind was on November the 19th is not really a relevant consideration for the jury.
I'm gonna overrule that objection.
Grounds of relevance.
Answer that question.
Please repeat the question.
Why did you interject that information into the interview?
Because I didn't think it was relevant.
You didn't think what was relevant?
What I commented on.
I'm asking you why you made the comment. Why did you tell the police the information you did, that Andrea had made it perfectly clear to Mr. Newman that she wasn't interested?
Right.
Did you think it wasn't clear when Andrea had talked about Mr. Newman?
No, it was clear.
I'm asking you then why you interjected where you did.
Could you tell me what my interjection was?
Let's play clip 13.5 again, please.
You may.
Thank you.
Could I just explain it to you that Andrea came on board in her job as one of the only females amongst a group of...
No, that's not
I know,
necessarily
I know.
true.
And she has conducted herself above board. She's extremely professional. This is Rusty's brother.
Yeah, we have to.
That's fine. I just need for you to...
That information, Mrs. Greenberg, why was it that you injected that information into the interview?
Because Andrea has always conducted herself above board in her relationship with her coworkers, with her superiors.
And that space, I mean, certainly you don't work at General Electric, is that right?
I do not.
And you'd never even been there during the time Andrea worked there, right?
That is correct.
So all of your information is just based on what Andrea's told you, is that right?
My information is based on knowing my daughter.
And trying to protect your daughter.
I know my daughter. I know what her values are.
Can you play the rest of the clip 13.5, please?
You know that as soon as that happened, she shared that with me. And she said, I made it very clear to him that I wasn't interested in him, and that this wasn't going to go anywhere. And
You knew about all this.
I knew this. So she talks with me.
Yeah.
We're close. And she said, I can handle it. I said, what are you going to do? Should you go to someone, HR? Who do you talk to about
Right.
sexual harassment? And she said, no, I can give you this. I'm making making it clear to him that this will never, it's never going to happen.
How long?
What?
How long ago?
You know what?
Months.
No, I do not.
Not now.
Not now.
We don't need to talk about it as a family now, okay?
But it was something that she's such a professional that she said,
We understand.
we're not here judging. I understand.
Right.
But I
But if you
just,
feel better, you can continue, but you don't have to, you don't have to justify it.
okay, I'm just telling you. I'm just telling.
Bonnie, you're going on.
I'm sorry.
We're all around it.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mrs. Greenberg. I don't have any further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Clegg, is this your witness?
Yes, Your Honor, sure is.
All right, you may cross-examine if you wish.
Dr. Greenberg, you have a PhD?
I do.
If you don't mind, if I just call you Mrs. Greenberg, is that okay?
Absolutely.
When was it, to the best of your recollection, when Andrea first met Rusty?
When she was in college, she was a freshman. He was a junior.
Let me just ask you this. Was he 2 years older than Andrea, if you recall?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, ma'am. I'm sorry.
They met at a religious organization, Hillel, at Indiana University.
Did they begin dating, to the best of your recollection, while Andrea was a freshman?
Yes.
Did that relationship continue until Rusty graduated from college?
There was a period of time where there was a slight separation.
Do you recall, and if you don't, that's certainly, how long was that period of time when there was a separation?
I don't recall the exact amount of time.
Did they get back together before Rusty graduated from Indiana University?
Oh, yes.
And did they remain together during the period of time when Rusty had graduated and Andrea finished up at Indiana University?
Yes.
Where were you living at that time, ma'am?
Ohio,
Okay. And to your knowledge, where were the Sneidermans living at that time?
Cleveland.
Do you recall during the summers of Andrea's sophomore and junior year whether she resided with you or whether she ever spent any time in Cleveland?
She had some type of position over summer, and she was in Cleveland.
Was that where Rusty would have been at the time?
Yes.
To your knowledge, were they still together as a couple during that period of time, ma'am?
Yes.
After Andrea graduated from college, what year would that have been, by the way, if you recall?
95. 98, I think.
After Andrea graduated from college in 1998, did she move to Chicago?
She did.
To your knowledge, did Rusty move to Chicago as well?
He did.
During that time, were they living together?
They were.
Did they at some point get married?
Yes.
When would that have been, ma'am?
While Rusty was at Harvard.
Would that have been on December 30th of 2000?
Yes, sir.
Was that in Florida?
Yes.
Was that, were you and your husband present at that marriage?
Yes.
Okay. And were Rusty's mom and dad present at that marriage?
Yes.
You obviously had contact with them during that period of time prior to their marriage. How much contact would you have had with them as a couple between the time when they met in Andrea's freshman year and the time when they actually got married in December of 2010?
Numerous times.
Can you, as best you can, tell us what that means, ma'am?
We went to visit them in Chicago. They came to see us often as they could.
When they came to see you, would they come as a couple?
Yes.
Did they appear to be in love?
Yes.
Was there ever a time up until the death of Rusty Sneiderman on November the 18th of 2010 where you ever changed that impression that they appeared to be in love?
Never.
Did at some point they move to Boston?
Yes.
Was that so Rusty could go to Harvard Business School?
Yes, sir.
Did Andrea move with Rusty and work in Boston while he was at Harvard Business School?
Yes, sir.
And did Rusty then graduate from Harvard Business School?
Yes.
At some point, did they wind up in the Atlanta area?
Yes.
Were you living in Atlanta at that time?
No.
Is the reason that you are living in Atlanta at present because Rusty and Andrea were here and because Todd and his wife were here?
They asked us to come to Atlanta.
Okay. When did Todd and his wife move to Atlanta?
I don't remember the date of that. But it was before Rusty and Andrea were here.
At some point, did Rusty and Andrea have some kids?
Yes,
Are those two kids currently living with you?
they are.
Okay. And is Andrea currently living with you at this time?
She is.
Has she been living with you, with the exception of the time that she was in custody, since the death of her husband?
We have never been apart since November 18th.
Okay. And that would be of 2010.
That's correct.
Okay. How old are the kids now, ma'am?
Sophia will be 8. Ian will be 5.
Were they 5 and 2 back on the day when Rusty was shot and killed?
Yes, sir.
Did you have, during the year 2010, opportunities to spend time with Rusty and Andrea before Rusty's untimely death?
Yes, sir.
How often would you see the family?
Regularly. That would mean, number one, we were the primary babysitters.
Okay. And would you have occasions where you would sit? Well, let me ask you this. How often would your husband and yourself babysit for Rusty and Andrea's kids?
Once every 2 weeks, whenever they went out.
Okay. And would you, how frequently did they go out?
Once a week.
Okay. Did their going out once a week occur during the course of 2010 up until the time of Rusty's death?
Yes.
When they would ask you to babysit, would they bring the kids to your house, or would you go over to their house and babysit at their house?
We went to their home,
Okay. And when you say we, who are you referring to?
my husband and I.
Okay. At that time, would both Rusty and Andrea still be there before they went out?
Absolutely.
So, and did you have occasion other than when you babysat for them to see them on other times as well?
Yes.
How often would you estimate that you would see them, leaving out the number of times that you babysat for them during 2010, ma'am?
We saw them on the weekends frequently. We would go out to dinner.
Were you the member of a synagogue at that time?
Yes.
Were Andrea and Rusty members of the same synagogue as well?
Yes.
Would you see them at religious services?
Yes.
Were there times in the year 2010 when you would be invited to their lake house out near Lake Oconee?
Yes.
Did you attend a birthday party for Sophia in the year 2010?
Yes.
Did you attend a birthday party for Ian in 2010?
Of course.
Did you notice tension between Andrea and Rusty during the course of that year?
No.
How often would you speak to your daughter during the course of 2010?
On a daily basis.
How often would you speak to her during the course of that time period? When you talk to her on a daily basis, how long would this be on the phone?
Yes.
How long would these phone calls last?
5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on what we had to talk about.
Would you catch up on what might have happened that day?
Yes,
Would Andrea tell you about what had happened at work?
sometimes.
Would she tell you about what sort of project she was working on at that time?
Yes,
Would she ever discuss her relationship with Rusty with you?
yes,
Were there concerns in the family about everybody having too much to do?
yes,
Okay. And did she discuss those concerns with you?
yes,
Did she ever tell you that she and Rusty were fighting on a regular basis?
no,
Did you ever, when you were in their presence, notice any change in their behavior from what it had been before during the year 2010?
no,
Did they argue with each other in your presence?
they didn't argue.
Were they ever unusually quiet with each other in your presence?
No,
At some point, did they get a nanny, as far as you know, in the year 2010?
yes.
And do you recall when that would have been?
I don't recall exactly. No, I don't.
Did you discuss with Andrea why it was that she felt she needed a nanny?
Yes,
What did she tell you in that regard, ma'am?
that going back to work had its pluses and minuses.
Was she concerned prior to going back to work as to whether that would interfere with her ability to spend time with her kids?
Yes,
Can you tell us about those conversations that you had with her?
I told her that she and Rusty were smart people.
I'm sorry, what, ma'am?
She and Rusty were smart people and they would work things out.
Okay. How many kids did you have?
2.
Okay. When your kids were little, were you working?
I was.
Okay. And was your husband working?
He was.
Now, going back to the summer of 2010, to your knowledge, were there times when Andrea had to travel?
Yes,
Would she ever, while she was out of town, communicate with you?
yes,
How often, while she was out of town, would it be that she would communicate with you?
she was quite busy, so I think the communication was less than when she was home.
Did she ever tell you that Rusty had told her at any point that she was not a good mother?
That she was not a good mother.
No. Did Andrea ever tell you that Rusty had told her, Andrea, that she was not a good mother?
No,
Were you ever aware at any time of there being a period of time, perhaps as long as a week, where she and Rusty were not speaking with one another?
no,
Did you have occasion to see her in person during the year of 2010 and talk about her relationship with Rusty?
yes,
During those conversations, did you notice that her eyes were dark and cold?
no,
Did you have occasions to speak to her about her boss?
yes,
Did you ever have those conversations with her in person?
yes,
During the course of those conversations, did you notice that her eyes would sparkle when she spoke about her boss?
no,
When you would talk about her boss with Andrea, how long would the conversations go on for?
5, 10 minutes.
And was she perplexed as to what to do with the situation regarding her boss?
Absolutely.
This was the individual she was directly reporting to, if you understood correctly. Is that right?
That was my understanding.
Did you understand whether or not she was located in the same building on the General Electric campus as him, or was she located in a different building?
She was in a different building.
Did she indicate that she had contact with him on a regular basis?
Absolutely.
How long had it been when she went to work for GE that she had worked in an environment that was not outside of the home? As best you can recall, ma'am.
When she had children? Or
Was there a time when she was working for a company in an office?
yes,
How long had it been from that time when she was working for a company in an office until she went to work for GE in March or April of 2010?
I don't recall.
Okay. Had it been a number of years?
Oh, yes.
Did she indicate to you when she spoke to you that she needed help in her job when she first began?
Yes,
Did she indicate to you that her boss was providing help and assistance to her?
yes,
Did she indicate to you that she was appreciative of the fact that her boss was providing help and assistance to her in her job?
absolutely.
During the course of those conversations, did she ever tell you that she had some sort of romantic involvement with her boss?
She told me at one point in a conversation that he said that she said he really liked her.
Okay. And you have related the substance of that conversation on direct examination, have you not?
Yes, sir.
Your initial reaction was, that's great. Thinking, I suppose, that it's good that the person you work for likes you and thinks you're doing a good job, right?
That's correct.
And you communicated that fact or your belief to her, right?
I did, but she corrected me.
And she corrected you by basically saying, he likes me not so much as an employee, but as a woman, correct?
That's correct.
And did she appear to be concerned when she communicated that fact to you?
Yes,
Was she seeking your advice and your opinion at that time?
yes,
And did you give her your advice?
I did.
Did you bring the subject up, or did she bring the subject up?
She brought the subject up.
Did Andrea, in the course of her communication with you between April 2010 and the date of Rusty's death on November the 18th of 2010, ever tell you that she was thinking about divorcing Rusty?
No, sir.
Had you ever heard her use the term divorce in the context of talking about Rusty?
Never.
Had you ever gotten any impression whatsoever that she would consider leaving her husband?
Absolutely not.
And again, you communicated with her virtually, with the exception of when she was out of town, every single day. Is that correct, ma'am?
That's correct.
To your knowledge, did you guys go on a cruise sometime in March or April?
We did.
Okay, and let me clarify. I said you guys. I guess you need to tell us who exactly it is went on this cruise.
I think it was our family.
Okay, when you say the family, tell us who that is, ma'am.
I think it was, well, I know it was Andrea and Rusty.
And did you and your husband Herb go?
Of course.
And did the kids go?
Yes.
Did anybody else go as far as you can recall?
I don't know.
As best you can, how long would that particular cruise have lasted for?
A week.
Okay. And did you notice any sort of unusual tension or animosity between Andrea and Rusty during the course of that trip?
No.
Based on what you saw, did they appear to be having a great time on the cruise?
Yes.
Based on what you saw, did their kids appear to be having a great time on the cruise?
Yes.
Did they go on another cruise, and when I say they, I mean Andrea and Rusty, in November of 2010?
Yes.
Do you recall whether you and your husband went on that cruise?
No.
Do you recall whether Sophia and Ian went on that cruise?
No.
Okay, so it was just Rusty and it was just Andrea on that cruise, right?
Yes.
When was that cruise in relationship to the time when Rusty was shot and killed?
I believe it was about a week before.
How long were they together on that cruise?
I think it was a 4 or 5 day cruise.
Did you hear from them while they were on the cruise?
I don't recall.
Did you have occasion to spend time with Andrea and Rusty during the month of November 2010 leading up to the actual death of Rusty?
Of course.
Okay. And again, did you notice anything out of the ordinary concerning their interaction or relationship with one another?
No.
Would you have been in a situation where you were physically in contact with both of them?
Yes.
Did you notice any noticeable silences between the two of them?
No.
Are you familiar with the phrase, the silent treatment?
I'm familiar with the phrase.
Did you notice either one of them imposing the silent treatment on the other?
No, sir.
Did you go to a birthday party at the lake where Rusty was driving a boat? Yes or no? Maybe you have to answer out loud.
Yes.
Okay. And whose birthday would that have been for, if you recall?
Sophia?
Okay. Sophia would have turned 5 at that time. Is that correct, ma'am?
Yes.
What month would that have been, if you recall?
I think it was beginning of September.
Okay. And did you have a chance to spend time with both Rusty and Andrea at that time?
Yes.
Did you notice anything unusual about them at that birthday party?
No.
Were a lot of people invited to the party?
Yes.
As best you can, ma'am, can you tell us how many guests would have been invited to that party?
We're probably 40 people.
Did Rusty and Andrea have a boat?
Yes.
Was it a motorboat?
Yes.
Did guests at the party want to go out on the boat?
Yes.
Was Rusty spending a lot of time taking folks for a cruise around the lake?
Yes.
Did you find that unusual?
No.
Any particular reason? Had you ever seen Rusty, or had you been at previous functions at the lake where your daughter and son-in-law had hosted other people?
Yes.
Okay. On those occasions, did Rusty and Andrea have a boat?
Yes.
On those occasions, did Rusty take people out for rides on the boats?
It was one of his favorite things to do.
Okay. Would he be doing it all day long?
If he could.
He loved the boat, right?
He did.
He loved taking people out on the boat, didn't he?
He did.
And there was nothing different about his behavior at Sophia's birthday party than any other birthday party or any other function where you folks were out at the lake house, right?
Nothing.
Now, did you and your husband ever buy a house out at Lake Oconee yourselves?
We did.
When did you do that, ma'am?
After Rusty's death.
Did Andrea go back out to the lake house herself?
Objection, Your Honor. It's relevance.
I'll move on, Your Honor.
All right, so stand,
Okay.
let's move on.
Did you have occasion to see Andrea and Rusty when they got back from the cruise?
Of course.
Okay. And this obviously, well, let me ask you this. Where was it and how was it that you saw them after they got back from the cruise?
Well, when they came home, and we were then finished babysitting.
Let me ask you this, ma'am. Were you babysitting for both of the kids while they were on the cruise?
Absolutely.
Were you staying at their house?
Yes.
When Rusty and Andrea returned, did they come to their house?
Yes.
Did you see them in person at that time?
Yes.
Would that have been about 3 days before Rusty was killed?
Yes.
Tell us about how they appeared at that time, ma'am. Were they quarreling?
No.
Were they angry with one another?
No.
Were they giving each other the silent treatment?
No.
Did they appear to be happy?
Yes.
Did they tell you they had a good time? Did Andrea tell you she had a good time on the cruise?
They had a wonderful time.
Was there anything that caused you to believe when they got back from that cruise that they were anything other than very much in love?
There was nothing to make me believe otherwise.
November the 18th. You're in bed. Your husband, I take it, is not. Is that correct, ma'am?
That's correct.
Someone gets a phone call, right?
My husband.
Okay. And to your knowledge, was that Andrea?
Yes.
So Andrea and your husband spoke on the morning of the 18th in addition to Andrea and yourself.
That's correct.
Did either you or your husband on that morning before you got to Dunwoody Prep call up Todd, your other son, and ask him to come to Dunwoody Prep?
I don't remember whether my husband called him or Andrea.
And if you don't remember, that's perfectly fine. Okay. And if I understood correctly, upon receipt of this phone call, you immediately got out of bed, put something on, and started to drive expeditiously, I guess was the right word, to Dunwoody Prep.
That's correct.
Would it be fair to say that you guys were going as fast as you possibly could?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you, at some point during the course of that drive, or when is it during the course of that morning, that you first spoke to your daughter, Andrea?
As we were driving to Dunwoody Prep, I was on the phone with her the whole way.
You described her as hysterical at that time.
I did.
While you were driving in the car to Dunwoody Prep, as best you can, ma'am, and if you can't, that's fine, tell us how long you would have spoke to your daughter.
For the entire trip until we arrived at Dunwoody Prep. So it had to have been 12 to 15 minutes.
During that time, did your daughter, the defendant in this case, ever tell you that Rusty had been shot?
No, sir.
Was she coherent during that period of time?
She was coherent.
Again, what exactly was she telling you?
Something's happened to Rusty. No one will tell me what. Something's happened to Rusty. I can't get there fast enough.
Okay. Do you recall her tone of voice?
She was, her tone of voice, frightened.
Would it be fair to say that it was not conversational?
Absolutely not conversational.
And you kept telling her to stay strong and hang in there, right?
I was concerned that she would have an accident driving.
You told her that you and your husband, her dad, were on the way, right?
I said, we're with you all the way. We're going to get there. We're with you. Stay with us. Stay with me.
Was your tone of voice then similar to your tone of voice now?
I tried to be very, very calm so that I wouldn't get her more upset than she was.
When you got to Dunwoody Prep, did you see Rusty's car?
Yes.
Did you see crime scene tape around that car?
Yes.
At some point, did you get out of the car you were in and approach the crime scene tape?
Yes.
Did anyone else get out of the car who was with you, i.e. your husband, and approach the crime scene tape?
My husband.
At some point, did your other son, Todd, arrive at the location?
Yes.
Did he join you at the crime scene tape?
He did.
How far would you have been from Rusty's car at that time?
I'm very bad at measurements.
Can you, in terms of this courtroom, can you demonstrate the distance for us?
Probably from here to the doors.
And when you say the door's in the back of the courtroom?
Yes, sir.
Maybe 40 feet, correct?
I think so.
Was there anything obstructing your view of Rusty's car?
No,
Did you see any obvious damage to Rusty's car?
no,
Based on the observations you made of the car, did you have any reason to believe he had been in an automobile accident?
no.
Was his car in a parking spot?
Yes,
Did you see anything on the ground?
I recall my husband saying there was.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
No, it's a stay in that objection.
All right, that is fine. Okay. How long did you remain at the crime scene tape? And if you don't know, it's perfectly fine to say, I don't recall.
At least 5 minutes, 7 minutes.
During that time, were you attempting to locate your daughter?
I was attempting to find out what had happened to our son-in-law, and I wanted to know where our daughter was.
Okay. Was anyone telling you where your son-in-law was?
No,
Was anyone telling you where your daughter was?
no,
Did you have your phone with you at that time?
yes.
Were you trying to reach Andrea on the phone?
She had arrived just a few minutes before we did. And I was still talking with her as she pulled into the parking lot. I knew that the car had stopped. I continued talking, but she wasn't there anymore. All I could hear was screaming.
Did you see Andrea's car?
I did not see her car.
At some point, you are in, I guess, your car, correct?
We were told to go home.
And this was by a representative of the Dunwoody Police Department, right?
That is correct.
Okay. But at some point, you see Andrea, correct?
Yes.
And you are in your car when you see Andrea, correct?
Since no one was telling us where she was, I was determined to find her.
Nothing wrong with that, ma'am. Please focus on the question.
Well, I'm going to let you ask questions,
All right, okay.
but as far as the commentary,
I just focus on the question. Were you in your car when you located Andrea?
Yes.
Okay. And you said she was in the back of the building near a dumpster. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you got out of the car to go over to her and comfort her, did you not?
I did.
And describe her emotional and physical state at the time when you did so.
She was in the arms of a teacher at Dunwoody Prep. I don't think she was standing very well. She was crying. I took her in my arms. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to even do for her. And we put her in the car. And we drove to her home.
Was she inconsolable during that period of time?
Absolutely.
Was she able to carry on a conversation during that period of time?
No.
Reflecting back, do you have a crystal clear memory of the exact sequence of how things occurred on that one there?
Crystal clear?
Yes.
Absolutely not.
Did your daughter appear to be traumatized on that morning?
Yes.
Were you traumatized on that morning?
Yes.
You guys, and I say you guys, it's you, your husband, your son, and Andrea go to Andrea's house, right?
Yes.
And during that period of time, your husband is attempting to call various medical facilities to determine where Rusty would be, correct?
Correct.
What is Andrea doing during this time?
She's curled up in a fetal position
Is Andrea assisting in making phone calls?
No.
Does Andrea have her phone?
Yes.
Is she trying to communicate with anybody during this time?
No.
When you say fetal position, describe it for us, please, ma'am.
She was curled up, holding herself.
Was she weeping?
She was.
Was she hysterical?
She was.
Was she able to communicate?
No.
There was reference made of a phone conversation placed to Don Sneiderman. Are you aware of such a phone call having been placed?
Yes, sir.
Who is it, to the best of your knowledge, who was it, who made that phone call to Don Sneiderman?
My husband.
And that's Herb Greenberg?
Yes.
Okay. Once you find out that they are at Atlanta Medical Center, do the four of you, your husband, your daughter, your son, go to that facility?
Yes.
Were you present when Andrea was advised that her husband was dead?
Yes.
What was her response?
She fell out of the chair she was sitting in.
Did someone pick her up off the ground?
Our son.
What was your reaction?
Disbelief. Horror.
Were any of Andrea's friends there at the time?
Not at that moment, I don't believe.
Shortly thereafter, did some of her friends show up?
Yes.
How many of them, if you recall, ma'am? And if you don't, again, that's fine.
I think there were 2.
Okay. Did they attempt to comfort and console her?
Yes.
Okay. Was she communicative during this period of time?
No.
When she was told, was there a discussion about whether an autopsy could be conducted on Rusty? If you recall.
I believe so.
Okay. And when you say you believe so, are you sure? And if you're not sure, that's fine. Okay.
There was a discussion.
And did that conversation involve Andrea?
Yes.
Was she able to give consent to whomever to conduct an autopsy on her husband?
Yes.
Is there some sort of Jewish tradition that discourages at least autopsies?
Yes.
Okay. Was there any discussion between yourself, your husband, your brother, or your son, and Andrea about that fact?
If it was going to help find out why Rusty was murdered, then of course permission would have been granted.
And was in fact permission granted for an autopsy to be performed on the body of Rusty Sneiderman?
Yes.
Did you all then, shortly thereafter, go back to the house?
Yes.
Describe Andrea's condition as best you can from the time when you left the hospital, finding out that Rusty was deceased, until you got back to the house.
She was inconsolable in the car, but her major concern was what we were going to tell the children.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I apologize. Could you say
Her
that?
major concern was how we were going to tell Ian and Sophia.
At that time, they were 5 and 2, correct?
Yes.
Did she verbalize or state out loud that concern?
Of course.
Where were the kids, by the way, during this time?
In school.
Was Sophia at Vanderlyn Elementary?
Yes,
Is that a DeKalb County public school?
yes,
Was Ian still at Dunwoody Prep?
yes.
How is it that Ian was still at Dunwoody Prep?
That's where he was. What we didn't know what else. Why? That's where he was. We thought he. I don't.
Did anyone want to take him to the hospital?
To the hospital?
Yeah, to Atlanta Medical Center.
Take Ian?
Yeah,
No.
okay. Did anyone want to tell him at that time that something had happened to his dad?
No.
Later on the 18th, did you have occasion to come into contact with Sergeant Cordellino and Detective Thompson?
Yes, sir.
Can you estimate for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what time of day that would have been?
Late afternoon.
Sun still up or not? And if you don't know, that's fine.
I think the sun was still up.
Okay. And did you have occasion to speak to the two of them at that time?
I did.
Okay. Did they want to come into the house?
They did.
To your knowledge, did either one of them present you with a search warrant?
They did not.
Did they get inside the house?
They did not.
Okay. Were there news reporters around at this point, by the way?
I believe that there was media around
Okay.
forever.
Speaking of the media, going back to the morning parking lot at Dunwoody Prep, you made reference to helicopters in the course of your direct examination. Do you have any idea whether those were media-related helicopters or otherwise? And if you don't know, that's
I
fine.
don't know.
Okay. Did anyone come to the front door with you when you spoke to Sergeant Cordellino and Detective Thompson?
Our son saw two people approach the house with badges. And he came into the house, and I was at the door with my husband.
Was Andrea at the door with you and your husband when you had a conversation with Cordellino and with Thompson?
No, sir.
Is there any doubt in your mind about that fact?
Absolutely not.
Did anyone demand entrance into the house?
No.
How long was this conversation with these two gentlemen?
Less than 5 minutes.
Did you ask them to leave?
I did.
Why?
We were all in shock. We had just come back from the hospital. She was made to answer questions in the hospital. We were traumatized. How was she able to talk to anybody?
At the time when the two detectives, or the detective and the sergeant, approached the front door, where was Andrea?
In the keeping room, next to the kitchen,
Forgive my ignorance, I have no idea what a keeping room is.
in an area next to the kitchen,
Okay. Where would that have been in relationship to the front door?
2 rooms away.
Okay. Did you have any communication during the time that the cops were there with Andrea, letting her know that the cops were there?
No,
Did you on your own just say, not a good time, go away, come back tomorrow? Perhaps, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but was that the substance of the communication?
I said we are a house in mourning. Could you please come back at another time?
And what was the response of the police?
They left.
Did they quarrel or argue with you about coming back at another time?
No,
Or did they simply say, no problem, we'll be back?
that's what they said.
They did in fact come back the next day, right?
They did.
Did Andrea have anything to do with your telling the police to go away on the 18th?
No, sir.
Did you communicate to Andrea that the police were at the front door on the 18th?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Andrea while the police were at the front door and you were having the conversation with them?
No.
Did a number of people arrive at the house on the 18th?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us some of the folks who would have been there, ma'am?
Friends, close friends of Andrea's.
How many of Andrea's friends showed up?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance?
I'm all over the objection. I give him some latitude. Answer the question if you can.
There had to be 15 people, perhaps.
Okay. Primarily females.
Yes.
Okay. During that time, do you know if Andrea had her phone?
I don't. She had her phone. The phone was in the house.
Okay. Do you know if physically she was in possession of the phone? And again, if you don't know, I'm not suggesting you answer one way or the other, ma'am.
I don't know.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of her ever having given the phone to anyone else?
At the hospital.
Who is it that she gave the phone to at the hospital?
Andrea Lippman.
Did you know prior to November the 18th of 2010, Andrea Lippman?
Yes, sir.
How many times had you met Andrea Lippman prior to that date?
Numerous times at many of the family functions that we had.
Was she frequently a guest at family functions hosted by your daughter and son-in-law?
Of course.
Okay. Were you familiar with a woman by the name of Tammy Parker at that time?
Yes.
Was she also a friend of Andrea's?
Yes.
And was she also a frequent guest at social functions hosted by your son or your daughter and son-in-law?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see both of them at the house on November the 18th?
I know for sure that Andrea Lippman was there. I don't recall if Tammy Parker was in the house.
You were present when the police came back on the 19th, correct?
Yes.
At one point during the tape that has been played, it appears that you make reference to Steve Sneiderman showing up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall any interaction at that time between Steve and Andrea when Steve first came into the room?
No.
Okay. Now, Don and Marilyn Sneiderman were present during the course of the entire interview. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Are the Sneidermans a couple who are seated in the far back of the courtroom?
Yes.
Is that both Mr. and Mrs. Sneiderman?
Yes.
Okay. Now, did you go to the funeral?
Yes.
Tell us about that. Well, let me just, I'll narrow it down. Did you have occasion to observe Andrea's demeanor and her emotional state during the time when the funeral occurred?
Yes.
Could you describe that for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please?
No, I'm going to object to the relevance.
Your Honor, I don't see how it could be more relevant in light of the allegations that the state of Georgia is making. And in light of
The allegation of the
in
indictment?
light of Ms. Citron's testimony, which they elicited.
Well, that's a little different. But you said that, the
Well-
indictment, in light of the indictment, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay, well, I'm also noting in light of the testimony of Shana Citron, which has been solicited from the state of Georgia.
I don't recall any testimony from Ms. Citron about the defendant's behavior at a funeral.
I think there was lots of testimony about Andrea's disagreement or problems that she had with her husband and the state of the relationship between she and her husband, and I would certainly think
I
this...
understand, but was there an objection from the defense during that testimony about that issue?
Was there an objection? No, I don't recall if there was. I actually was not...
Well, the point I'm making is...
I'm trying to think. I don't recall if there was. I was not
I understand that.
doing Ms. Citron.
I understand. But she has the right to make an objection independent of what the defense may or may not have made objection to during the course of that testimony. But I understand. I'm going to sustain her objection.
Okay.
Let's move on.
Okay. Did you have occasion to see, well, was Andrea living with you after the funeral?
From the day that Rusty was murdered, we have lived together.
Did you conduct what is called Shiva at your house?
At Andrea's home,
To your knowledge, did Hemi Newman, at some point during the course of Shiva, show up at Andrea's home?
he did.
Did you actually see him yourself?
I did.
Did you see whether or not he and Andrea had any sort of interaction with one another on that day?
I did not see any interaction.
Do you know how long he would have been at Andrea's house on the evening when he was in attendance?
When people come to a home for Shiva, there's a service that is conducted, and that service probably lasted 15 minutes. He probably came 10 minutes before the service began.
Were there other, to your knowledge, General Electric employees who were with him?
Yes,
Had you seen at that time a sketch that had been prepared in the course of the investigation?
yes,
To your knowledge, was that sketch disseminated at the funeral?
I believe so.
To your knowledge, were there employees of the General Electric Corporation at that funeral?
Yes,
Other than that, did you have any physical contact? Had you ever seen Hemi Newman before that day?
no,
And after that, have you ever, other than perhaps his trial, ever been in his physical presence?
no,
Was Andrea concerned about her own safety during this period of time?
yes,
Did she make any attempts to beef up household security?
yes.
When is it that she would have done that, ma'am?
Very soon after Shiva, I believe.
Obviously after the death of Rusty, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. Now, when you say you are living with Andrea, are you living at her house? Is she living at your house? Or where is everybody residing?
initially we were living at her home
How long did you remain living at her home?
until Sophia finished kindergarten,
Which would have been when, ma'am?
sometime in May.
Of 2011?
Yes,
To your knowledge, did Andrea go to the Dunwoody Police Department on November the 24th?
yes,
Did you go with her?
I believe I did.
Were you interviewed by the Dunwoody Police Department?
I was.
And to your knowledge, was that interview recorded?
It was.
Now, let's jump ahead a little bit to the trip to Florida. When was the trip to Florida?
Very soon after Sophia finished school for the holiday break.
And that would have been, when you say the holiday break is Christmas, right?
Correct.
You folks are Jewish, right?
Yes,
So you don't celebrate Christmas, but you do celebrate Hanukkah, correct?
that's correct.
But the school system doesn't revolve around Hanukkah, it revolves around Christmas.
Yes, sir.
Would that have been when you would have left for Florida?
Yes,
It is you, your husband, Andrea, Sophia, and Ian, correct?
yes,
You go to a house in the West Palm Beach area, correct?
yes,
Is that where Andrea and Rusty were married?
yes,
December 28th, Ms. Cross has asked you about an email that was received from Hemi Newman.
yes.
Do you recall actually seeing that email yourself?
Andrea read it to us.
And you said something about Bruno Mars. Did that name mean anything to you at the time? Okay. Was it in conjunction with a song?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you know if he's even a singer?
No,
On the 30th, Do you and Andrea go anywhere?
Objection, relevance.
I'm gonna say that objection. You wanna narrow that one down a little bit? Did her and Andrea go anywhere on the 30th?
Okay. Did you and Andrea go to the synagogue where she got married?
Objection, relevance.
Mr. Clegg, why is that relevant?
It shows the nature of the relations between the parties, Your Honor, the state of
Between
Georgia.
the mother and the daughter?
No, between herself and her husband. May we approach her?
Yeah, come on up, Lori.
Okay.
Come on up.
Back to 11 Live's continuing coverage of the Andrea Sneiderman trial. It is about 14 minutes before 3 o'clock. This session has been going since 1:30. I'm Jeff Hellinger along with Kelly Burke, who is the former district attorney of Houston County. They have had the mother on the stand a long time today. Bonnie Greenberg. Really haven't heard anything from her that has either been surprising or that has been anything different from what we understand from her.
You would expect a mother to testify the way she has for her daughter. I'm at a loss to figure out, what it is either side thinks they're getting out of her.
What was the prosecution thinking they were going to get out of her?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I watched it in careful.